Prince William just said his brother is more dead to him than alive, and the world can't believe what they just heard. In a moment that's already sending shockwaves through royal circles, Prince William has broken his silence with a chilling remark about his estranged brother, Prince Harry. When asked if reconciliation was possible, William didn't hesitate, and what he said left even veteran royal watchers speechless. What led to such a brutal response? What's happening behind the palace walls that we're not being told? And is this the final nail in the coffin of the brothers' fractured bond? Stay with us, because Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was supposed to be a moment of healing, a bridge between fractured bloodlines, a symbol that, despite the deep wounds inflicted over years of very public betrayals, accusations, and silence, something of a bond still lingered. A thread not yet fully severed. Prince Harry, once considered the most relatable and emotionally transparent member of the British royal family, extended what many believe to be an olive branch. The 2027 Invictus Games, a global event founded in his name, was to be the stage not only for athletic triumph but also for royal reconciliation. And in a move that stunned insiders, Harry formally invited the entire royal family, King Charles, Prince William, Princess Anne, and even Queen Camilla, to attend. But what followed was not the healing gesture he had envisioned. Behind the palace gates, what began as a letter of invitation quickly transformed into a private firestorm. King Charles III, still grappling with the ramifications of a son who publicly distanced himself from the monarchy and accused it of unconscious bias and institutional coldness, was reportedly left furious by what he perceived as an act of manipulation wrapped in sentimentality. Sources close to the king claim his reaction was visceral and immediate, refusing even to acknowledge the invitation with the courtesy of a formal decline. Prince William, for his part, is said to have greeted the invite with stony silence, quietly advising palace aides to have no comment on any developments relating to Harry and Meghan. And while the Queen Consort, Camilla, said little publicly, those close to her have indicated that her patience with the Sussexes wore thin long ago. The media speculated. Royal commentators went into overdrive. Was this a sincere attempt at reconnection by a son burdened with guilt and regret? Or was it, as the royal household suspected, a calculated move orchestrated by Meghan Markle, designed to reinsert herself into the spotlight of royal prestige under the guise of global service? To understand the shockwaves sent through Buckingham Palace by this invitation, we must rewind the clock and examine the many fissures that have formed in the House of Windsor since Harry and Meghan's royal exit in 2020. Dubbed Megxit by the press, the couple's departure from royal duties, and their subsequent public interviews, Netflix docuseries, and controversial memoir, drew a clear and painful line in the sand between them and the rest of the firm. In the years that followed, every move by the Sussexes seemed to widen the chasm. From Harry's scathing revelations in his memoir Spare to Meghan's accusations during the Oprah Winfrey interview, the royal family, stoic by tradition and slow to react, found itself under relentless fire. And yet, they never broke character, never fully retaliated. But the silence was anything but empty. Now, nearly 7 years after that fateful exit, and just 2 years after King Charles ascended the throne following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Harry's invitation threatens to upend whatever delicate peace had settled between them. This wasn't just any event. The Invictus Games holds a deep personal meaning for Harry. Created in 2014 to honor wounded, injured, and sick servicemen and women, the Games are his signature contribution to the world. More than a public relations platform, it is an extension of his identity, a project rooted in his own experiences as a soldier, a royal, and a man seeking purpose outside the palace walls. So when Harry extended the invitation, it was interpreted by some as a poignant plea, a way to show his father that he could both honor duty and carve his own path. But to others, especially within the royal institution, the gesture reeked of irony. The same man who abandoned royal protocol, renounced royal funding, and accused the institution of racism was now asking those very same royals to stand beside him, for the cameras, for history, and perhaps for closure. Inside the palace, the response was as cold as the marble floors that line Buckingham's great halls. Royal insiders reported that King Charles was not merely dismissive, but livid. The timing, the context, the public nature of the invitation, none of it sat right. It was not seen as reconciliation, but as rebranding. A move designed to recast Harry as the long-suffering yet loyal son, ready to forgive and unite. More damningly, some sources suggest that Charles viewed the move as yet another headline-grabbing stunt. After all, the invitation was leaked to the press only days after reports emerged that Meghan and Harry were facing mounting financial pressure, with their Archewell Foundation under investigation for mismanagement of donor funds. Could this be, as some royals feared, an attempt to recast themselves as victims turned peacemakers to distract from darker headlines? But why did this invite spark such unrestrained anger in King Charles? Perhaps the answer lies not just in what was said, but in what it represented. The monarchy, despite its ancient lineage, functions in many ways like a tightly controlled brand. Every appearance, every statement, every silent gaze carries meaning. And when someone who has rejected the institution suddenly tries to summon it back into their orbit, on their terms, it risks undermining the image of authority, unity, and protocol that the monarchy fights desperately to maintain. This wasn't a family member reaching out in private with a heartfelt note. This was a high-profile, media-conscious invitation to a globally televised event. An invitation not just to attend, but to publicly endorse Prince Harry's life choices since leaving the royal fold. And that, for King Charles, was unacceptable. The anger was not just personal, it was institutional. The monarch, though a father, is first and foremost the head of state. Accepting the invitation would have required acknowledging, even tacitly, that Harry's journey outside the monarchy was compatible with the values of the crown, that his accusations, his memoir, and his media circus were forgivable under the banner of Invictus. Yet many insiders argue that Charles has already paid that price. He walked Meghan down the aisle when her own father failed to show. He made unprecedented efforts to include the Sussexes in royal events even after Megxit. He even offered a public statement of love and support following their departure. But with each act of reconciliation came another perceived betrayal, another podcast, another accusation, another anonymous leak to the press. So when the 2027 Invictus Games invitation arrived, it did not read like a request. It read like a demand for legitimacy. Prince Harry's motivations, however, remain a topic of fierce debate. Some claim he is a man torn between two worlds, royalty and normalcy, struggling to find peace with a past that shaped him. Others say he's been swept into a vortex of celebrity culture, where relevance is currency and familial bridges are mere props in a never-ending reality show. And then there are those who see him as a sincere, wounded son seeking redemption in the only way he knows how, through service. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the 2027 Invictus Games will not just be about wounded warriors and competitive spirit. It will be about power, legacy, identity, and a family so divided that even the noblest of invitations can be seen as a declaration of war. And as for Meghan Markle, her silence has been anything but unnoticed. For someone known for curated social messaging and carefully timed appearances, her lack of comment has only added to the speculation. Did she help craft the invitation? Was this her idea all along? Or is she keeping quiet to let the headlines speak for her? Whatever her role may be, it is clear that her name remains woven tightly into every royal controversy. And many within the palace believe that as long as she remains part of the equation, true reconciliation with Harry will always remain elusive. What happens next is a question the world waits to see unfold. Will the royal family make a last-minute appearance at the Games to signal unity? Or will they snub the event entirely, sending a message that their patience has run out? We are only at the beginning of this story. The next chapters will be filled with confrontation, secrets, and high-stakes decisions that could forever change the legacy of the modern monarchy. This is not just about a family dispute. This is about a kingdom struggling with its past and one prince's attempt to shape its future. In the months leading up to the now infamous invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games, the world watched as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle quietly shifted into a new rhythm of life, publicly subdued but privately active. After a series of tumultuous years filled with televised interviews, royal bombshells, and global backlash, it seemed, at least on the surface, that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were settling into a less confrontational phase. They appeared at charity galas, released mental health-focused podcast episodes, and even hinted at new humanitarian collaborations in Africa. But behind this carefully maintained image of calm, something far more calculated was unfolding. Harry had been laying the groundwork for the next Invictus Games with renewed intensity. Having faced declining public sympathy and criticism over his memoir and other media ventures, the prince sought to return to the one thing that had always given him purpose and authenticity: supporting wounded veterans. The Invictus Games were not just a project for Harry, they were a manifestation of his identity post-military service, and more importantly, post-royalty. In a world where so many questioned his integrity and intentions, the Invictus Games remained untouched, respected, and universally applauded. But Harry wasn't simply planning another event. According to close sources, this version of the Games would be the most ambitious yet. Set to take place in Sydney, Australia, the 2027 Games were billed as a celebration of unity through adversity, a reflection of resilience across nations and generations. With record-breaking funding, high-profile sponsors, and government endorsements already secured, Harry saw a golden opportunity, not just for the veterans, but for something deeply personal. He wanted his family back. In private conversations with his inner circle, Harry was said to have been deeply affected by the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the weight that fell on his father, King Charles III. Despite the frost between them, Harry had never completely abandoned hope for reconciliation. In his mind, the Invictus Games, which bore no official connection to the monarchy but still carried the grandeur and solemnity of royal tradition, could serve as neutral ground, a place of peace, a place where the past could be forgiven, or at least temporarily set aside. This wasn't a plan born overnight. For nearly a year, Harry explored scenarios where his family could be gently reintegrated into parts of his world. He reportedly discussed private pathways of outreach, first through the king's aides, then through mutual friends within the aristocracy. The replies were cordial but non-committal. Still, Harry believed that if the invitation was official, if it came with dignity and humility, there might be a chance. Behind the scenes, however, there was a less idealistic subplot. Meghan Markle, who had endured blistering tabloid coverage and withering critiques of her authenticity and ambition, was not as optimistic about reconciliation. Those close to her claimed she viewed the idea of inviting the royal family as high risk with minimal chance of reward. But to keep peace in her marriage and protect the one venture that truly mattered to Harry, she gave her blessing, albeit reluctantly. The formulation of the invite was painstaking. It was to be formal, respectful, devoid of emotion-laden language, and grounded in the tone of international diplomacy. Every word was vetted by public relations teams and former military advisors to ensure it could not be construed as manipulative or self-serving. The letter emphasized the purpose of the Games, their global impact, and the profound respect Harry still held for the traditions he once walked away from. But underneath the polished language, there was desperation. Harry's circle believed that his reputation, once golden, now tainted, could find redemption if his family appeared beside him on that global stage. The image of the King of England, the future king, and the Sussexes standing united in a show of support for veterans would go far beyond mere photo opportunity. It would send a message of evolution, of healing, of a monarchy that could bend without breaking. And yet, for all the emotional energy Harry invested into the gesture, he was not naive. In the weeks before the letter was delivered, he reportedly consulted therapists, military comrades, and even figures from the entertainment industry who had navigated public scandal and familial estrangement. The responses were mixed. Some warned him that the royal institution rarely forgets or forgives. Others urged him to go ahead, that even a rejection would show the world who was truly trying. Still, for a moment, there was hope. Harry rehearsed the announcement of the invitation at a private fundraising dinner. He imagined a speech where he thanked his family for their support. He even briefly discussed seating arrangements with organizers, assuming that, at the very least, Princess Anne might accept. She had long been seen as the most pragmatic member of the royal family, and her support for veterans was as fierce as Harry's. If anyone could cross the line of tension, it would be her. But while Harry operated on hope and legacy, those within the royal apparatus viewed the situation with quiet dread. Reports suggest that royal aides began tracking media signals coming from Montecito weeks before the invitation was sent. The Sussexes team had been unusually quiet, their communications focused on charity rather than controversy. Some interpreted this as a calm before a storm, and they were right. In London, whispers of a coming overture from Harry triggered meetings among palace officials. The King's Communications Office prepared for potential headlines and coordinated with press secretaries to control the narrative, should the invitation be leaked. The assumption was clear: Harry was going to try something. And then it arrived. A hand-delivered, embossed envelope bearing the insignia of the Invictus Foundation and addressed, "To His Majesty the King, Buckingham Palace. Within its folds lay the very thing many feared, an elegant but unmistakable appeal for public reunion. The letter invited the King, Queen Consort, Prince and Princess of Wales, and Princess Royal to attend the opening ceremony of the 2027 Games in Sydney. The tone was neutral, the message clear. Harry wanted them there. Not as monarchs, not as dignitaries, but as family. What followed within the palace was not a debate, but a dismissal. Sources suggest the king read the letter silently, placed it on his desk, and said nothing for several minutes. When asked for a response, he is said to have waved it away, muttering something about reputations built on ruins. It was a phrase that baffled his aides, until one quietly remarked that it was likely a reference to how Harry had profited from burning bridges and now sought to rebuild them with applause. Prince William, briefed by a senior aide, reportedly shook his head and turned the conversation immediately towards scheduled engagements. There was no reply from the Prince of Wales. No acknowledgement. No interest. But none of this had yet reached Harry. In his home in Montecito, California, Harry waited. Days passed. Then weeks. No official acknowledgement came. But something else did the leak. An anonymous source, possibly from inside the Invictus Planning Committee or perhaps even from Harry's own media team, confirmed to the press that the royal family had been invited. The story exploded across front pages, television segments, and social media timelines. Suddenly, the quiet planning of the Invictus Games turned into a royal circus. And while Meghan remained outwardly silent, the signs of stress were visible. Her appearance at a wellness conference in Los Angeles came off as unusually rehearsed. Analysts scrutinized her words, her dress, her posture. Everything about the Sussexes had once again become a lightning rod for speculation. What had begun as a calm period of forward-looking ambition quickly turned chaotic. The storm Harry feared, the backlash he hoped to avoid, had arrived. And yet, even as headlines exploded and pundits took sides, Harry held firm. He continued preparations for the games, attended meetings, and recorded a video message for the global community of veterans. In the clip, he didn't mention his family. He focused on the mission, the athletes, the cause. But behind the scenes, he was shaken. He had gambled everything on the belief that a gesture made in good faith, grounded in shared values, would be enough to reopen the door to his family. Instead, it had only reminded the world, and himself, how tightly that door remained shut. The British monarchy has mastered the art of silence. Through wars, scandals, divorces, and even abdications, the royal family has consistently relied on the power of restraint and discretion as a tool of survival. The public may scream, the press may roar, but within the palace walls, silence often speaks louder than words. And when Prince Harry's invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games arrived, that silence became deafening. There was no statement, no response, no official confirmation or denial from Buckingham Palace. Not even a whisper to the press from the usual anonymous royal sources. To the outside world, it appeared as if the letter had been swallowed into a void. But behind the scenes, the reality was far more emotionally charged and politically fraught than anyone could have anticipated. According to those within the palace, the delivery of the invitation was treated not as a gesture of goodwill, but as a calculated move designed to entrap the monarchy into a public relations dilemma. There was a sense among senior courtiers that Harry, regardless of his motives, had forced the family into an impossible corner. And they would be seen as capitulating to a rogue royal who had spent years publicly undermining them. Decline, and they would appear cold and unwilling to reconcile, particularly with a son inviting them to a cause as noble as the Invictus Games. King Charles, it was said, was furious. His fury, however, did not manifest in outbursts or tirades. It came in short, clipped sentences, prolonged silence, and a stern refusal to acknowledge what some advisors were calling a trap. For a man who had waited decades to sit on the throne, only to spend the early years of his reign battling personal illness and persistent family discord, this was one headache too many. To Charles, the invitation was not just poorly timed, it was deeply insulting. In his view, Harry's pattern had become all too familiar: provoke, retreat, extend a hand in public while wielding a knife in private. The Netflix documentary, The Oprah Interview, and the memoir Spare had, in Charles's mind, irrevocably damaged the monarchy's reputation. He believed he had already offered more grace than expected, from walking Meghan down the aisle to publicly expressing love for his son and daughter-in-law after their departure. But every attempt at peace had, in his opinion, been repaid with more betrayal. For Charles, this wasn't about Harry's event or his charity. It was about legacy, about being remembered not as a weak monarch constantly dragged into drama, but as a figure of strength and principle. And so, he chose the most powerful response at his disposal: silence. Prince William, on the other hand, was less emotional and more pragmatic. His relationship with Harry had deteriorated from childhood closeness to icy distance. At one point, they were considered a formidable duo, the modern face of the monarchy. But years of tension, from personal disagreements to accusations of betrayal, had shattered that image. William saw the invitation as a political move, not a personal one. From his perspective, it was yet another attempt by Harry to re-enter the royal sphere without addressing the real wounds he had caused. He reportedly told aides that the games, while noble, were not royal duties and therefore required no response from the firm. Behind closed doors, William's team issued internal guidance to ignore all press inquiries regarding the invitation and not to deviate from planned public engagements. Palace aides describe a rare moment of unity between Charles and William. Both agreed there would be no official presence at the Invictus Games. It was not to be discussed in speeches, statements, or appearances. It would be as if the invitation had never been received. But silence does not mean indifference. Within the walls of the palace, conversations took a far more personal tone. Privately, Charles was said to be deeply hurt, not because Harry had invited him, but because it had come with no prelude, no private call, no soft introduction, no attempt to bridge the chasm before going public. To him, it felt less like a request for reconciliation and more like a media trap. It was an emotional ambush. And worse, it was an invitation that, if accepted, would have put him in front of global cameras beside a son who once accused him of emotional neglect, of failing his late mother, of favoring Camilla, and of cutting him off financially. There was also a lingering concern about the influence of Meghan Markle. While some within the royal family had once believed she could become a unifying figure, those hopes had long vanished. In the wake of her media appearances and what they viewed as coordinated leaks, many royals now believed she was not only a barrier to reconciliation but an active architect of division. The idea that Meghan had helped craft the invitation only deepened the distrust. Whether she had or hadn't, perception mattered, and the perception was that this was her hand at work. Camilla, the queen consort, offered no public opinion but reportedly rolled her eyes when the invitation was mentioned during a meeting. Her dislike for the drama surrounding Harry and Meghan had only intensified in recent years. A survivor of decades of public scrutiny herself, Camilla had come to value discretion above all else. The idea of appearing beside the couple again was unthinkable. Yet the absence of a public response only fueled speculation. In the days following the leak, tabloids across the UK splashed headlines ranging from Harry's peace offering rejected to Charles turns his back once again. Social media became a battlefield, with supporters of the Sussexes arguing that the royal family was ungrateful and rigid, while defenders of the monarchy insisted Harry had burned too many bridges to expect forgiveness now. Inside the firm, media staff were instructed to monitor the headlines closely but offer no engagement. The royal family would continue its public duties, unaffected and unbothered. That, after all, was the royal way: never complain, never explain. But not everyone agreed with this course of action. Princess and the king's sister, and known for her dedication to military causes, was reportedly torn. She had long supported the Invictus Games in principle and had a deep respect for veterans and wounded service members. Some within her office lobbied for her to consider a private statement of support, if not an appearance. But she too ultimately declined to act, citing the need for unity within the royal family and the importance of standing by the king's position. Behind the scenes, conversations among royal advisors became more strategic. Some questioned whether the ongoing freeze-out of Harry and Meghan was sustainable in the long term. Could the monarchy continue to ignore the couple while they retained influence, fame, and access to global platforms? Would their presence at events like the Invictus Games make the royal family appear petty if they stayed away? Others argued that any engagement would only embolden the Sussexes, that appearing at the games would lend them royal legitimacy they no longer had a right to claim. After all, Harry had not only stepped away from royal duties, but had actively worked to redefine himself apart from them. Why, then, should the royal family now step into his spotlight? The deeper issue, however, was one of trust. The royal family no longer trusted Harry. Not with their words, not with their time, not with their presence. Every conversation could be recorded. Every meeting could be leaked. Every attempt at peace could be repackaged into another media project. The fear wasn't just about headlines. It was about being weaponized. And so, the silence endured. It was not the cold, indifferent silence of strangers, but the heavy, painful silence of family members who once loved each other and now couldn't find a way back. A silence filled with memories, regrets, and unanswered questions. Was there a moment when things could have been different? Could a private call before the invitation have changed the outcome? Was Harry genuinely reaching out, or was he simply leveraging family for validation? These questions echoed in the halls of both Buckingham Palace and Montecito. But no answers came. Only silence. As the 2027 Invictus Games drew closer, the royal family continued its engagements as scheduled. Garden parties, state visits, military commemorations, all carried on with the precision and decorum the monarchy was known for. No mention of the games. No slip of the tongue. Not even a sympathetic word from a junior royal. The wall was solid, and Harry was firmly on the outside. Yet the silence did something else too. It made the world wonder. If the royal family could not reconcile with a son who served in the military, built a global charity for wounded warriors, and offered a respectful invitation, what hope was there for healing it all? Had the crown become so consumed with protecting its image that it could no longer see the humanity beneath the headlines? Or had Harry's actions over the years so eroded the foundation of trust that even the most noble gesture was met with suspicion? Only time would tell. But for now, one thing was certain. In the face of an invitation meant to bridge divides, the royal family had responded with the one weapon it knew best. There are moments in history when a single letter, a solitary gesture, can ignite a firestorm that exposes long-buried tensions and shatters the illusion of calm. In the modern royal saga, Prince Harry's invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games was exactly that, a seemingly respectful outreach that did far more than ask for attendance. It reopened old wounds, pushed family members deeper into silence, and drew global attention back to a royal feud that had never truly cooled. On the surface, the invitation was elegant and diplomatic. A printed envelope bearing the Invictus Foundation seal, hand-delivered to Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Kensington Palace. Each letter had been carefully drafted by Harry's team, every word scrutinized to ensure formality without desperation. It was addressed not just to King Charles and Queen Camilla, but to the Prince and Princess of Wales and Princess and as well. The message was clear. This wasn't a private reunion request. It was a public olive branch, and it was meant to be witnessed. Yet it wasn't the content that triggered a royal crisis, it was the context. To the royal family, especially those still bound to the traditions and demands of the crown, the letter wasn't viewed as a warm invitation. It was viewed as an ambush, delivered during a sensitive period when the king was navigating delicate international diplomacy, and with rumors of Charles's fluctuating health already swirling in the press. The timing couldn't have been worse. It was also not lost on anyone that the media got wind of the invitation within 72 hours of its delivery. If this were a private gesture, the palace wondered, why was it suddenly public knowledge? Senior aides suspected, perhaps rightly, that someone within Harry's circle had leaked the news. Whether it was intentional or simply a failure in media discretion, the damage was done. Now, every newspaper, every TV analyst, and every online commentator had the story. Prince Harry had invited his estranged family to his signature event, and they were ignoring him. This public framing created immense pressure on the royal household. Critics began accusing the monarchy of being rigid, unforgiving, and emotionally aloof. Supporters of Harry praised his maturity and willingness to make the first move. Meanwhile, those loyal to the crown saw through the optics and asked a much more difficult question. Why now? Why was Harry asking his family to join him, after years of accusing them of institutional cruelty, neglect, and bias? From within the palace, the perception was brutal. The invitation was not an act of love. It was a stage, an arena in which Harry could control the spotlight, define the narrative, and place the royal family in a situation where any decision they made would draw criticism. Attend, and it would seem like a royal endorsement of the Sussexes after years of tension and televised grievances. Refuse, and the media would label the monarchy cold and unyielding, incapable of empathy even when called upon in a spirit of unity. This, more than anything, is what infuriated King Charles. According to insiders, he believed that the invitation was designed to make him appear as either weak or heartless, neither of which he could afford. At a time when the monarchy was fighting to remain relevant and respected in a changing world, any association with emotional dysfunction or family breakdown was a blow to its carefully maintained image. But Harry's intention, according to those close to him, wasn't to cause a stir. In fact, he believed he was doing the right thing. In his eyes, the Invictus Games weren't just another platform for veterans. They were a living embodiment of everything he stood for after stepping away from royal duties. He saw the Games as a symbol of service, courage, and healing. And despite the animosity, he still viewed the royal family as part of that journey. He also understood the power of optics. Harry knew that if the royals were to attend, even for just one ceremony, it would send a message to the world that reconciliation was possible, not just within a family, but within fractured institutions, fractured nations, and fractured identities. He saw this as a legacy moment, a turning point, perhaps even a beginning of something new. But good intentions cannot erase years of public tension. And no matter how carefully the invitation was worded, the memory of past grievances lingered. The phrasing of the letter itself was dissected by royal advisors. While it maintained respect and avoided anything emotional or accusatory, it included one line that struck a nerve with many within the firm. We believe this event is a moment not just for veterans, but for families. To show the world that unity is possible after hardship. This sentence, while seemingly innocent, was interpreted as a veiled commentary on the royal family's inability to come together. To the king's advisors, it felt like a subtle guilt trip, disguised as inspiration. It hinted that if they didn't show up, they were contributing to the very division the Games aimed to heal. Palace reaction was swift, though still hidden from the public eye. Meetings were held. Legal and media teams discussed the possibility of issuing a statement, if only to say the invitation was under consideration. But Charles ultimately decided to stay silent. No response, no statement, no comment. And that silence lit a fuse. The media frenzy that followed transformed what could have been a meaningful family moment into a public spectacle. Headlines screamed betrayal. Talk shows speculated endlessly. Pundits questioned the monarchy's emotional intelligence, their capacity for forgiveness. Meanwhile, online platforms became echo chambers of fury. Hashtags like #ForgiveHarry and #RoyalColdWar began trending, creating a digital battlefield of conflicting narratives. But while the public dissected the drama, the real damage was occurring behind the scenes. Within the royal household, staff reported growing tension. Longtime advisors were split. Some believed ignoring Harry was a mistake, that the monarchy could have used the invitation as a moment of positive press and reconciliation. Others argued that attending the Games would reward disloyalty and invite more chaos into the already fragile public image of the institution. Even junior royals, who had largely stayed out of the conflict, found themselves trapped. Attending the Games independently of the king's decision was considered out of the question. The monarchy, they were reminded, must move as one body. Unity in silence, unity in action. What few realized was that the fuse Harry had lit extended beyond the palace. International media picked up the story and gave it more weight than anticipated. American outlets framed it as a humanitarian effort ignored by an outdated monarchy. Commonwealth nations debated the role of the royal family in modern leadership, with some using the event as an argument to distance their countries from the crown. This was no longer just a family matter. It was a geopolitical narrative, one that threatened to undermine the monarchy's soft power abroad. And in Montecito, Harry watched it all unfold. Though he rarely responded to press inquiries, those close to him say he was shaken by the reaction. He had hoped for a simple yes, or even a private no. What he got was another media storm, a storm that painted him either as a victim of royal rigidity or as a manipulator exploiting his family's image. Meghan, who had kept her distance from the affair, became increasingly concerned about the toll it was taking on their public standing. According to reports, her team advised her to avoid any comments that might suggest frustration or disappointment. Privately, she was said to be livid, not at the royals, but at the fact that the gesture she had warned Harry about was now being used to reopen every old wound. But Harry refused to pull the invitation or issue a follow-up statement. In his mind, it was done. He had taken the first step. Whether or not his family responded was up to them. He would not beg. Yet the damage was already done. The fuse, once lit, reached its destination. Instead of healing the rift, the invitation exposed the raw, festering nature of the royal divide. It reminded the world of every insult, every accusation, every tear-filled interview, and silent betrayal. And it forced the public to ask an uncomfortable question. If even a father and son can't find peace on a stage built for healing, what hope does anyone else have? The Invictus Games may go on as planned. Veterans may gather, triumphs may be celebrated, medals may be awarded. But behind every speech, behind every embrace, the ghost of that unanswered invitation will linger. It will hover over the stadium like a shadow, reminding the world that sometimes, even the noblest gestures cannot survive the weight of pride, pain, and the past. Within the quiet and ornate chambers of Clarence House, behind the scenes of scheduled diplomatic meetings, official engagements, and the daily routines of monarchy, King Charles III sat with the weight of a nation on his shoulders, and the burden of his family tearing at the seams. When Prince Harry's formal invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games arrived, it was not received with gratitude or warmth. It was, by all accounts, a spark to a powder keg that had long been packed tight with silence, betrayal, and unspoken resentment. The king's reaction was not theatrical. There were no dramatic speeches or shattered teacups. But for those who witnessed the immediate aftermath, it was clear that something within the monarch snapped that day. The letter arrived mid-morning, delivered by private courier, its envelope bearing a crisp seal and the unmistakable insignia of the Invictus Foundation. Though Charles had long ceased expecting surprises from his youngest son, the sight of the envelope prompted a prolonged silence as he weighed its implications before even reading the content inside. A senior aide, who had served in royal households since the Queen Mother's time, later confided that Charles's face hardened as he read. He didn't blink. His fingers gripped the edges of the thick paper, and his jaw tightened with every sentence. It was as though he had been transported back through years of wounds, each word reminding him not of a hopeful reconciliation, but of the relentless humiliation the royal family had endured since Harry's departure. The king finished reading, closed the letter, placed it on his desk, and remained silent for nearly a full minute. Then came the words that, according to sources present, cut through the room like a sword. Not again. This boy will not stop. The words were muttered, not shouted, but they carried the force of a man pushed past his emotional limit. This was not a father's heartbreak. This was a sovereign's fury. A fury born not just of personal pain, but of the fear that his reign was being overshadowed, again, by the drama of a prince who had walked away, yet refused to let go. Charles was not merely angry that Harry had extended an invitation. He was enraged by the timing, the delivery, and most of all, the public leak that followed. The king was convinced that the press getting wind of the letter so soon after its delivery was no coincidence. Whether Harry had personally orchestrated the leak or not was irrelevant. In Charles's mind, it was yet another example of his son using the press to box the royal family into a corner, to turn a private decision into a public spectacle. The Invictus Games were undeniably a noble cause. Charles respected that. But what he saw in the letter was not nobility, it was pressure. A subtle weapon masked in formality. To Charles, it was Harry saying, "Join me, or look heartless in front of the world." The monarch stood, walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, and clasped his hands behind his back. His aides stayed silent. It was not their place to interrupt the king's thoughts when they turned inward, especially when they turned toward family. Charles spoke again, this time quieter. "I gave him everything. Everything. And still he looks to make a fool of us." This statement revealed more than just anger. It revealed a lingering sense of betrayal and confusion. From the king's perspective, he had made every effort, within reason, to maintain a bridge with his son. Even after the Oprah interview, even after the publication of Spare, even after years of Meghan-driven controversy, Charles had left the door open. He never publicly criticized Harry. He included him in the Queen's funeral procession. He even reportedly left provisions in his will ensuring Harry would not be completely cut off. But in his mind, those gestures were never enough for Harry. And now, this invitation felt like the final insult, a demand for attention disguised as reconciliation. As Charles sat again, his voice became more deliberate. There is no intention to attend. No acknowledgement. No reply. The decision was final. The aides took note, understanding that no deviation from this position would be permitted. The king had drawn a line. It was, for all intents and purposes, a personal embargo on Harry's event. Charles wanted no part in legitimizing what he saw as a manufactured opportunity to rehabilitate a damaged image. Privately, however, some members of the king's inner circle worried. Charles, for all his calculated decisions, was still a man in his 70s, carrying the emotional burden of a fractured family and the responsibilities of modern monarchy in a rapidly changing world. His health, though guarded, had become a growing topic of speculation. He had been seen less frequently, had scaled back certain engagements, and was rumored to be undergoing periodic treatment for an undisclosed ailment. In this context, Harry's invitation may have been seen by some as a son's attempt to reconnect while there was still time. But Charles refused to entertain this view. To him, love had become weaponized, and reconciliation offered in public was no reconciliation at all. The Queen Consort, Camilla, did not interject, but according to accounts from her staff, she was wholly in agreement with Charles. She had long grown weary of Harry and Meghan's recurring presence in the headlines. To Camilla, who had fought a lifetime for her place at Charles's side, any renewed engagement with Harry felt like a reopening of old wounds. She remained tight-lipped in meetings, offering only curt nods or raised brows when the Sussexes were mentioned. That evening, over a modest dinner at Windsor Castle, Charles reportedly spoke with William by phone. The conversation was short and, as always with the two men, direct. "Have you read it?" Charles asked. "Yes," William responded. "Any thoughts?" "No surprises. We ignore it." "Good." That was the extent of it. No emotion, no speculation, no exploration of motive. The decision had already been made. Neither man saw the invitation as a genuine gesture of peace. For William, particularly, the wounds Harry had inflicted were still raw. The memoir had painted him as an aggressor, a villain, a brother who failed to protect. William had remained largely silent in response, but silence did not mean forgiveness. And the idea of publicly attending one of Harry's events, under the watchful eye of global media, was unthinkable. In the days that followed, Charles remained composed in public, smiling for cameras, greeting diplomats, and engaging in ceremonial duties. But those closest to him noted a change. He was more reserved, more withdrawn. The laughter that once echoed through private halls grew less frequent. The weight of Harry's letter, and everything it represented, pressed heavily on him. He had lost a son, not to death, but to distance, resentment, and competing narratives. And now, with the world watching, he was being asked to perform the role of a forgiving father on a stage built by the very person who had walked away. In truth, the king had no desire to perform. He believed reconciliation, if it was to come, must be built slowly, in private, without cameras, without leaks, and without the pretext of global events. And so, as the final word was passed down through royal channels, the message was simple. The king has no plans to attend. It was said without bitterness, without flourish, but it was firm. And in Montecito, when that message reached Harry through unnamed intermediaries, he reportedly sat for a long time, staring out the window, just as his father had days before. Neither man spoke to the other. No calls were made. No follow-up letters exchanged. Just silence. Cold, heavy silence. The kind that echoes far louder than words ever could. While the public narrative surrounding the 2027 Invictus Games invitation centered on Prince Harry's attempt to mend fences with the royal family, those behind palace walls and within the Sussex inner circle whispered a different story, one where Meghan Markle's influence loomed large, complex, and more strategic than many dared to admit. Though her name did not appear on the official documents and her voice was absent from any public statements, her presence, her guidance, and her calculated restraint shaped every facet of the unfolding drama. For Meghan, the post-royal chapter was supposed to be one of reinvention and redemption. The Duchess of Sussex had entered the British monarchy full of hope and ambition, only to be met, according to her version of events, with scrutiny, coldness, and racial bias. The rupture had been public, painful, and globally televised. And in the aftermath, every appearance, interview, and endeavor she undertook was scrutinized with brutal intensity. By 2025, the media climate had become even more volatile, forcing her to step back from the spotlight just as Harry was ramping up his plans for the next Invictus Games. Yet even in retreat, Meghan was active. According to sources familiar with their operations in Montecito, she remained involved in every major decision the Sussexes made, even as she deliberately avoided direct exposure. She had learned from the backlash. After the storm of criticism following their Netflix series and Harry's memoir, she chose a new path, pulling strings from behind the curtain, rather than stepping onto the stage herself. When Harry began planning the 2027 Invictus Games, Meghan supported the project wholeheartedly. She understood its importance to him, not just as a charitable mission, but as a symbol of continuity, a reminder to the world that he was more than just a runaway prince. The Games offered a platform of integrity, one that couldn't be dismissed as a vanity project or a media grab. And for Meghan, who had seen the couple's approval ratings fluctuate wildly in the years following their exit from royal duties, this was a rare opportunity to rebuild public goodwill. But Meghan, ever the strategist, saw another layer. The Invictus Games were also a potential stage for reconciliation, or, at the very least, for reshaping the narrative. If Harry could secure the attendance of the royal family, it would do more than boost the Games. It would reframe Harry as the peacemaker, the son who, despite public wounds, remained open to unity. It would position Meghan, by association, as a woman committed to healing and maturity rather than resentment and control. Yet she knew the risks. According to insiders close to the couple, Meghan was initially hesitant about the idea of inviting the royal family. Her relationship with them, particularly with Kate Middleton and Queen Camilla, was virtually non-existent. Trust had been shattered, and the sting of past tabloid headlines, fueled by unnamed palace sources, had not been forgotten. For Meghan, extending an invitation to the same people she believed had allowed her suffering to continue in silence felt disingenuous at best and self-destructive at worst. But Harry was determined. He wanted his father and brother there. Not for show, he insisted, but because the Games were a moment bigger than their feud. Meghan didn't agree entirely, but she saw the logic and the opportunity. She gave her support, under one condition: they would do it formally, respectfully, and without emotional flourish. The letter would be professional, not personal. There would be no apologies, no appeals, just a dignified request based on shared values and public service. And so Meghan began advising from the shadows. She helped review drafts of the invitation, consulted with media advisors on how best to time the delivery, and worked to ensure that any leaks, if they happened, would serve the message, not the scandal. Her background in entertainment and her experience managing image crises were assets that Harry increasingly leaned on. Some in their circles say Meghan's fingerprints were all over the timing of the invitation. With Archewell undergoing scrutiny over financial transparency and brand fatigue setting in, an event like Invictus offered a clean slate. Inviting the royal family was not just a move toward reconciliation, it was also a bid for renewed credibility. If the royals showed up, even in silence, the Sussexes could claim a symbolic victory. If they declined, the public might view Harry and Meghan as the bigger people, willing to put differences aside for the sake of unity. But this logic carried risk, and Meghan knew it. Privately, she feared that Charles and William would never accept. She suspected that any olive branch, no matter how carefully extended, would be viewed through the lens of past betrayal. And that, in rejecting the invitation, they would once again cast Harry and herself as outcasts, fueling a narrative of division that would be hard to spin positively. Still, she proceeded, because she also believed that doing nothing would be worse. That without an invitation, the Games would be interpreted as just another Sussex-led media event. By including the royals, they added weight, history, conflict, and perhaps even resolution. Some royal watchers claim this was all part of a larger strategy. Meghan, they argue, knew exactly what she was doing. That the invitation was less about genuine outreach and more about managing the Sussex brand. That she wanted to use the Games to demonstrate that Harry was still royal enough to engage with his family, and that she, in turn, was woman enough to encourage it. Others insist her motives were simpler, that she truly believed in her husband's cause, and that even if the family rejected them, they had to at least try. Whatever her reasons, Meghan kept her distance publicly. She made no comment when news of the invitation leaked. She issued no follow-up messages when the palace declined to respond. Her silence was strategic, a deliberate move to avoid accusations of meddling or emotional manipulation. But it also sparked questions. Her absence from Invictus planning meetings, public briefings, and promotional material drew speculation. Was she pulling away? Was the marriage under strain? Or was this just another PR calculation? Sources close to the Sussex team maintained that Meghan's distance was pre-planned. She wanted Harry to own this. The Invictus Games had always been his. Let him lead. Let him invite. Let him face the consequences. Yet even as she stepped back, she kept watch. When the palace ignored the invitation, Meghan's initial response was quiet but telling. She closed her laptop, excused herself from a meeting, and retreated to her private quarters. Those who saw her that day say she looked neither surprised nor particularly upset. If anything, she seemed vindicated, convinced that her initial concerns had been right. She reportedly told a close friend over the phone they were never going to come. But now the world sees it. That statement summed up Meghan's entire position. She didn't expect reconciliation. She didn't even expect civility. What she expected and achieved was exposure. By allowing Harry to reach out, and by saying nothing when the royal family failed to respond, she had effectively reframed the story. They had tried. And for a public tired of royal drama but still captivated by its emotional stakes, that mattered. Behind the scenes, Meghan continued to shape how the Sussex narrative would unfold. She greenlit a short film documenting the athletes' journeys, ensuring its tone was emotionally resonant and free of controversy. She met with stylists and image consultants to prepare for upcoming appearances tied to the games. And most importantly, she advised Harry on how to respond or not respond when the inevitable questions about the royal family surfaced. No comments. Only focus on the games, she reportedly told him. Let them look bitter. We focus on the mission. And so, even in silence, Meghan's influence echoed. Her fingerprints were invisible but everywhere. In the timing of the letter. In the structure of the invitation. In the management of leaks. In the careful construction of a story where the Sussexes offered peace, and the monarchy responded with indifference. Whether one sees her as a manipulator or a master of image control depends largely on which side of the divide one stands. But what's undeniable is that Meghan remains a central figure in this saga, not as a loud voice or visible presence, but as a force behind the curtain, pulling levers with precision. And in the world of Roya, if King Charles's reaction to Harry's invitation was a storm contained behind palace windows, then Prince William's response was a calculated frost, no less powerful, but infinitely more subtle. Where Charles was wounded and visibly angered, William was focused, deliberate, and, to many insiders, quietly ruthless. His silence wasn't indecision, it was strategy. His refusal to respond to the invitation wasn't simply out of loyalty to his father or resentment toward his brother. It was a statement of power, a decision designed not just to maintain the royal line's dignity, but to send a message. Harry no longer had influence in royal affairs. For years, Prince William had watched the drama unfold from the uncomfortable position of both participant and heir. As the second son, Harry had always lived in his shadow, and for the most part, they had maintained a delicate balance, brothers bound by blood, divided by temperament. But when Harry stepped away from royal duties and began dismantling the institution in interviews and memoirs, William was forced into a role he neither sought nor welcomed, the gatekeeper of the monarchy's moral authority. Now, with Harry attempting what seemed to be a public reconciliation through the lens of the Invictus Games, William found himself again at the crossroads of family and duty. And this time, he chose duty. Within Kensington Palace, the invitation to attend the 2027 Invictus Games was not seen as an appeal to family but a veiled challenge to the hierarchy. Harry, stripped of his HRH title, without the authority or status of a working royal, had bypassed traditional royal channels. He had not reached out through courtiers. He had not sent word via mutual family friends. He had sent a formal invitation that, when leaked, would create a public relations dilemma for everyone involved. And William, as always, saw the bigger picture. He understood that accepting the invitation, even privately, would be interpreted as the first crack in the royal family's carefully constructed wall of silence. It would be painted as royal approval, a signal that reconciliation was underway, even if that wasn't true. And it would put pressure on his father, the king, to follow suit. To William, that was unacceptable. What many outside the palace fail to grasp is how much William has matured into the role of protector, not just of the monarchy's image but of its future. As Prince of Wales, he is next in line to the throne. Every decision he makes now is weighed for its historical and symbolic value. He is no longer simply a son or a brother. He is a future king. Every nod, every gesture, every public statement sets precedent. He cannot afford to be seen as yielding to his younger brother's theatrics, no matter how noble the cause behind them. So he moved with silence. Not apathy, but calculated silence. Internally, William convened with his closest advisors. The conversation was brief. He made it clear that neither he nor Catherine would attend the games in any capacity. There would be no joint statement, no indication of interest, and certainly no last-minute surprise appearance. The royal communications team was instructed to deflect all inquiries, and to continue forward with the previously scheduled public engagements for that week, which included a climate summit in Oslo and a children's mental health event in Manchester. Even the placement of those events was strategic. William wanted to ensure that media coverage of his work during the week of the Invictus Games would not be overshadowed by stories of reconciliation or family drama. He knew the press would run headlines about his absence. He made sure those headlines were competing with photos of him working, shaking hands with diplomats, comforting children, and leading discussions on global issues. In private, those close to William say he expressed disappointment. Not in Harry's invitation, but in the fact that Harry continued to involve the family publicly without taking the necessary steps privately. William believed that any real healing would require accountability and time, neither of which had been offered. Harry had not apologized for the claims made in his book. He had not retracted any of the more personal attacks. And he had not made efforts to rebuild trust off camera, where it mattered most. To William, the Invictus Games invitation was too public, too theatrical, and too late. Moreover, there was a lingering question of precedent. If the royal family responded positively to Harry's invitation, what next? Would they be expected to attend other Sussex-led events? Would they be pressured into collaborative projects, appearances, or photo ops? William feared a slow erosion of royal protocol, where the line between working royals and former royals became too blurred to defend. His solution was simple: do nothing. But within that decision lay a masterstroke. William's silence wasn't just a personal choice, it was a shield for the monarchy. His refusal to engage protected the institution from a narrative it didn't want to participate in. And in doing so, he also shielded his father, who was already carrying the emotional and symbolic burden of rejection. Sources within Kensington Palace noted that William went a step further. He issued quiet word through trusted intermediaries that any member of the royal family considering attendance should think carefully about the consequences. This wasn't a direct order, it wasn't needed. William's influence is such that even subtle gestures carry significant weight, and his message was received loud and clear. Princess Anne, who had considered sending a private message of support to the veterans participating in the games, decided against it. Prince Edward, who had remained largely neutral in the family feud, also stepped back. The family, once fragmented in their approach to the Sussexes, now stood aligned under William's quiet leadership. It wasn't the kind of power move that made headlines. There were no grand declarations or dramatic ultimatums. But in the halls of the palace, William had effectively closed the door, firmly and without apology. And yet, William wasn't without his own internal conflict. Despite the controlled exterior, those close to him say that the situation with Harry remained one of the few topics that could visibly unsettle him. There had been moments, rare, private ones, where William admitted he missed his brother, that he sometimes wished for a world where they could go back to being allies, rather than rivals. But those moments were fleeting, quickly replaced by the reality of betrayal and the necessity of duty. Catherine, ever composed, was said to support William's stance completely. She had been painted unfairly in past media narratives, accused of coldness and complicity. But insiders say she had always welcomed Meghan in the early days, only to be met with distance and eventual hostility. Now, with her own public duties and growing influence as a future queen consort, Catherine had no interest in revisiting old tensions. Together, William and Catherine moved forward, eyes on the future, feet firmly grounded in tradition. Their refusal to engage with Harry's invitation was not bitterness. It was a choice, a deliberate, dignified choice to protect the institution they would one day lead. And in the days leading up to the Invictus Games, as Harry prepared for his keynote address and his global guests arrived in Sydney, William remained focused on his own engagements. Not once did he mention the games. Not once did he acknowledge the story dominating headlines. But his silence spoke volumes. It was the silence of a man who had seen too much, been hurt too deeply, and learned that sometimes power isn't about what you say. It's about what you refuse to acknowledge. As the days passed following Prince Harry's invitation to the royal family to attend the 2027 Invictus Games, the silence from Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Kensington Palace began to speak louder than any official statement could have. But while the royals held their positions and declined to respond, the world beyond their gilded walls erupted into a chorus of opinions, interpretations, and judgment. The public reaction, both in the United Kingdom and internationally, was nothing short of polarizing. In the United Kingdom, reaction to the royal family's refusal to acknowledge the invitation was deeply divided along generational and social lines. Traditional royalists, many of them older and more conservative, applauded the palace's silence. To them, Harry had burned bridges too thoroughly and too publicly to be welcomed back so easily. They remembered the Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, and the memoir Spare. They had not forgotten the accusations of racism, institutional cruelty, and betrayal. These supporters viewed the monarchy's silence as a show of discipline and strength. They believed the king and Prince William were right to uphold the dignity of the crown by refusing to be drawn into yet another emotional spectacle orchestrated by the Sussexes. The sentiment among these groups was that Harry had made his choice to leave, and with it, forfeited the right to expect royal participation in his post-royal ventures. But outside of that core loyalist base, the tone was less supportive and far more complex. Among younger Britons, particularly those who have grown up in a media-saturated world, the palace's refusal to respond came across as emotionally stunted. Social media lit up with posts criticizing King Charles and Prince William for missing an opportunity to display maturity and compassion. Hashtags like #RoyalForgiveness and #StandWithHarry trended on platforms such as X and Instagram. TikTok creators with millions of followers weighed in, many creating side-by-side videos comparing Harry's emotional vulnerability to the cold formality of his father and brother. Some commentators framed the royal family's silence as yet another instance of outdated tradition clashing with a modern, emotionally expressive generation. To these observers, Harry wasn't just a former prince. He was a symbol of someone choosing honesty over obligation, emotion over etiquette. And then there were the military veterans. For them, the conversation took a more sobering tone. Veterans from both the UK and other nations spoke openly in interviews, podcasts, and on social media about their respect for Prince Harry and their dismay at how his invitation had been treated. Many of them had participated in previous Invictus Games, and for them, this was more than a family feud. It was about solidarity, purpose, and honor. Some British veterans argued that the royal family's absence would feel like an abandonment, not of Harry, but of the cause itself. They questioned why such a powerful institution would allow personal grudges to overshadow an event that had transformed lives and celebrated wounded soldiers across the globe. One former soldier who competed in the 2023 Games wrote in an open letter published by a leading British paper, "This isn't about the monarchy. This is about veterans, about resilience, about showing up when it matters." The king was invited to honor that. He declined. Across the Atlantic, the reaction in the United